So that's good to know. Now, another question that comes up often is Saxon math spiral or mastery, or is it a combination of both? And you sent me a really interesting article about interleaving effect, right?
Yeah,
Is that correct? And I've been
yeah,
studying a lot about memory, and it just confirmed everything that I was learning. I was thinking how it's more beneficial to the mind, these connections that you're constantly switching back from versus just short-term memory and then forgetting it, right? Which
right.
happens with students all the time.
So
So
you
can you
use,
share a little bit about that?
yes. So you use the term interleaving, and if your viewers are interested, they could follow up and just research interleaving. Another term that they might want to look at is automaticity. Automaticity. And Benjamin Bloom was a guru in education circles for decades. Uh, I think he was most famous for taxonomy of educational objectives. And I remember seeing that back in the early, even in the 70s and then in the 80s. But his research towards the end of his career was in automaticity. And uh, automaticity is just automating skills and then putting together more skills and automating that. So he would use it as an example. And he looked at automaticity. He looked at, actually what he looked at was outstanding performances in the psychomotor realm, whether it was um, mathematic ability, typing ability, reading ability, um, gymnastics ability, uh, diving off of a high dive. So let's say Greg Louganis would have been a diver at the time. So if he's going off of the 3-meter board, if he has to think about what he's going to do in his dive, if he has to think about each move, he'd just be a grease spot on the top of the pool because it wouldn't work. He's just automated all these different movements over practice to make a perfect perfect dive.
Mm-hmm.
And that ability to clump things together and automate them is what frees the mind to do other things. So let's take problem solving, which is a really big deal in math education. And they
Yes.
say, oh, students shouldn't be doing things like memorizing basic facts. They should be doing problem solving. Well, I'll tell you, if you don't memorize basic facts, then it's going to be a problem just to figure out what 8 times 7 is. Um,
Yes.
why not automate? Why not use your precious memory to automate these skills and concepts so that you don't have to think about it? Instead, you can just focus in on the problem itself, the understanding the problem, the meaning of the problem, and you can free your mind from all the burdens of, well, how do I do long division? So
Right.
automating these skills is really important, which is why in a note to you, I mentioned the importance of facts practice.
Mm-hmm.
Facts practice is not just memorizing your addition, your multiplication tables and addition and subtraction facts. That's great. Absolutely, students should do that. But why not memorize some other things too, like fraction decimal percent equivalence or measurement equivalence, or how many ounces are in a pound, or how many inches are in a foot, and feet in a yard, and yards in a mile. And memorizing these things just commits to memory some things that you don't have to put your mind to when it comes to solving problems. So this interleaving and this automating basic skills and basic facts has it really affects how well the students are going to do as they go up as math gets more and more difficult for them. I mean, not more and more difficult for them, but more and more challenging, more and more complex. If they've automated these basic skills, then it becomes easier. For example, algebra, if students are having trouble with algebra, it's usually because their arithmetic skills aren't very strong. Or if they're having trouble with calculus, it's because their algebra skills aren't very strong. It's a weakness further down the line that's causing them to have some trouble. So being sure that you're mastering things all along the way is really important for the future success. So you asked about mastery learning and spiral curriculum. And I understand that people try to categorize Saxon in some way or try to understand it in some way. And I think what I would say is Saxon is its own animal. You know, it's its own
Yes.
thing. It's not, let's say we created a language arts curriculum, and you kind of like create a typical textbook because you're writing it out in a logical way for yourself, and then you Saxonize it.
Mm-hmm.
See, so we've made a verb out of it, you know, internally. We've made a verb out of it so that we know how the Saxon method works. So if we create a Saxonized version, we can feel assured that the students are going to learn and remember the content far better than if they're using a chapter type textbook.
Yes.
So it's its own animal, it's its own thing. Yes, there are elements of mastery to it and spiraling to it if people find comfort in using those words, or if it helps them to understand the structure of the program. But John used the words incremental development and continual review. I would add the word automaticity. I just think that's a real important ingredient. John, there is an interview out there between John Saxon and Benjamin Bloom, where he talked a little bit about this automaticity. But there are several things about Saxon that's unique. One thing I mentioned earlier is that individual authors are creating the content. That doesn't happen in other publishers.
Mm-hmm.
Other publishers are, even at Harcourt Achieve, when we were creating a new edition, they created a new edition for the high school books. Well, if it has John Saxon's name on it, then that's a book that he wrote. Now, there might be one that says Saxon without John's name on it. It says Saxon Algebra 1. Well, that's a book that he didn't write. Or Saxon Geometry, that's a book that he didn't write. Saxon Algebra 2. If it doesn't have John's name on it, then it's not one that he wrote. And it was written by a development house. By a development house, I mean, the publisher doesn't have internal authors. They have internal editors. If they want content, they write specifications out, send the specifications to a company that hires a bunch of math people, and they create the content and send it back, and then the editors go through it. That's the way most programs are written, not by individual authors. So if it's written by an individual author, you kind of get to know the author a little bit as you're going through the program, because that author's personality can't help but get incorporated somewhat into the content
Right.
of the book. So people got to know John Saxon, and they would invite him to speak at their graduations, or they just really appreciated him because they got to know him through his books.